been difficult days, but for me, I don't mind talking to you. So I don't know, from where should we start?
That is the voice of Omar Abdulaziz. He is a Saudi human rights activist living in Quebec who says he might be part of the reason why journalist Jamal Khashoggi disappeared. On Friday night, we reported the beginnings of this story, but today we have more on how the Canadian resident may be involved. Washington Post columnist Khashoggi has been an outspoken critic of the Saudi monarchy for years. He entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd, and he never came out. But these 15 men, who Turkish media are reporting are Saudis, allegedly entered the consulate. It's being reported that they are a hit squad sent to kill Khashoggi, possibly getting their orders from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman himself. The 33-year-old prince, he is the de facto ruler of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The details are still a mystery, but world leaders are looking for answers, including President Trump, who tells 60 Minutes he'll take action if it's proven the Saudis were involved.
We're going to get to the bottom of it, and there will be severe punishment.
Now, back to the dissident here in Canada, Omar Abdulaziz. After we heard Khashoggi disappeared, we reached out to him because a couple of weeks ago, you might remember, the University of Toronto Citizen Lab had discovered that his cell phone had almost certainly been hacked by the Saudi government. The Saudis allegedly planted some insidious spyware on Abdulaziz's phone through a phishing scam. When we reached him on Thursday, he told us that he and Khashoggi were close, they were almost brothers, that they spoke often, and he was afraid they had been spied on and that may have contributed to Khashoggi being targeted.
And yes, Mr. Jamal Khashoggi, and I'm sorry to say that, he was contacting me via my cell phone, the one that was hacked. So I'm pretty sure that they were listening to the interviews, they were reading the conversations that we had.
Abdulaziz says that he was in contact with Khashoggi just days before he went to that consulate in Istanbul. The two activists they'd been working together to fight Saudi's human rights abuses for over a year, saying that dissidents are being constantly harassed on social media. He wouldn't agree to going on camera with us, but he told me this on the phone. He said they were threatening us, saying we were going to be killed. They were insulting us. So we said, why don't we create our own army, a peaceful one that's going to talk about the human rights violations in our country? Well, you can imagine how that might have gone down in Saudi Arabia if they were listening, as he suspects. So he claims that the Saudi crown prince actually tried to lure him back to the kingdom, saying, MBS also sent me two of his own representatives with my own brother. This is to Canada. Then he says, when I refused, they jailed my brothers, but they couldn't do the same thing to Jamal Khashoggi because he was in the States. Abdulaziz says he sure doesn't plan on leaving Canada anytime soon, now that he's seen what happened when Khashoggi left the U.S. He told us, I told him about, obviously before, that these arrests that had happened to my brothers, and my friends were arrested too, and he told me, stay strong. Things are getting worse and worse, but you have to keep fighting. Joining me is Ron Deibert from the University of Toronto Citizen Lab. He joins us via Skype because he's in Switzerland. Ron, so you heard Omar Abdulaziz talking about his concerns. What did you think?
Well, Omar is understandably very stressed, and he has a good right to suspect that if he did indeed have relationships with Khashoggi, that he could have put Khashoggi in jeopardy, just like he learned that he put friends and families in jeopardy when they were apprehended and arrested back in Saudi Arabia, probably based on conversations and chats and emails that were intercepted from his phone. At the same time, I think it's very courageous of Omar to come forward.
So if his phone was hacked, and if he was talking frequently over years with Khashoggi on that phone, you think it's credible that his fear that he may have contributed to putting Khashoggi in trouble?
If they did communicate in the way that Omar is describing, 100%, they would have been able to see everything that Omar was doing on his device, including all of his emails, his chats, even those that are end-to-end encrypted. They would have been able to record and listen in on phone calls that he had. they would have been able to remotely activate the camera and capture ambient audio.
So if this happened, and we can't prove that, you can't prove that, how would it work? What could potentially the Saudis see? In theory, would they be watching 24/7?
Well, yes, you could look through all of the record of phone calls, all of the email contacts. In fact, going further, they could deploy the device without Omar knowing to send what appear to be messages from Omar to friends, family members, maybe even Khashoggi, that themselves contain malicious links.
So the Saudis are denying any involvement in the disappearance of Khashoggi. But I'm wondering if Omar's phone was hacked and they were talking, could the Saudis use it to track his phone, to track Khashoggi's phone, or track his actual whereabouts?
It doesn't necessarily mean they would hack his phone, but I would say there's a good chance that they would. This is a regime that, as we have shown, has violated commercial spyware in the past to target on dissidents, journalists, human rights activists. So it would frankly surprise me if they did not take advantage of any mistakes that Khashoggi might have made in clicking on links or receiving email attachments that are the channel through which this spyware is loaded onto a device. I will also say that I heard a clip on the BBC of Khashoggi just before he disappeared, where he relayed concerns in his community where people would have a private meeting and then later someone would be arrested and interrogated based on conversations in that private meeting. And he suspected maybe there were informants at the meeting. So everyone was turning and looking suspiciously at each other. What I thought in listening to that is there's something obvious here, and that is devices in that room were probably infected with spyware, allowing Saudi intelligence to eavesdrop on what's going on. And that probably explains why a lot of people in this community are disappearing or ending up in interrogations where they're presented with what are otherwise private conversations.
What are the possible broader implications here? I guess you've exposed how this particular spyware can work. How wide a net are we talking about, possibly?
Civil society groups, human rights organizations, journalists typically lack the capacity, the knowledge to properly secure themselves. Of course, everyone shares links and attachments. It's very easy for the average person to be tricked into clicking on a link or attachment that looks real. And authoritarian governments worldwide are using this technology to get inside and effectively neutralize political opposition.
Ron Deibert, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Wendy. Thank you.
We're going to take a closer look now at the mysterious Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. He was never expected to be that country's Crown Prince. He forced his way into the role after holding his uncle against his will overnight, pressuring him to give up his claim to the throne. The brutal way that he took power was a clue, really, to how the Crown Prince would end up ruling. While presenting himself as a reformer, letting women drive, and so on, in reality, he's been anything but, imprisoning hundreds of dissidents, business people, royal family members, and crushing any opposition. While Prince Mohammed has tried to charm the world, the Khashoggi disappearance has raised concerns that the Crown Prince's steel fist is now reaching into every corner of the world. And joining me is Robert Jordan. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia under George W. Bush, and he's the author of Desert Diplomat. So, Ambassador, we spoke to you a few months ago. There was some focus on Prince Mohammed, and you characterized him as a progressive authoritarian. What is your view of him now?
Well, I'd certainly put the emphasis on authoritarian today.
It has been speculated that Khashoggi's disappearance is because he was becoming increasingly vocal in his opposition to the kingdom's behavior, the crackdown on human rights and so on, and that this was causing a strain. What's your take on that?
I think this was probably the same Jamal Khashoggi that I knew 15, 17 years ago. I met with him a number of times when I was ambassador. I found him to be a direct, straight shooter, but not an agitator, and not someone who was trying to foment revolution, but rather point out ways in which greater freedoms might be enjoyed. And certainly this brought criticism even at that time. I think it's perhaps a more dangerous time to express anything other than a lockstep allegiance to this crown prince.
We have long heard of human rights abuses by the Saudi Arabian kingdom. Is this different? Is Prince Mohammed different than what you've seen before?
Well, I think this brings it to a new low in many ways. Certainly a year ago, we saw the detention, incarceration of a number of Saudi royal family members and business leaders. They were shaken down for about $100 billion, reportedly. And so we've also seen detention of even women who were advocating the right to drive at a time when that right was being granted. But I don't think we've seen anything as horrific as this hit squad coming in to murder a well-respected journalist and then chop him into pieces, apparently.
Yeah, well, we're still trying to get to the bottom of all of those allegations, but that is what the Turks are accusing. There have been reports that this is not a sign of strength, that it's a sign of weakness, and that this could be a sign that Prince Mohammed is in trouble, that there could be an insurrection. We know there are members of the royal family who are not in favor of his brutality or his position there. What's your take?
I think there's every possibility of that. I do think it's a sign of paranoia, for sure. I'm told that when he visited Houston recently at a large banquet, he had 2 food tasters with him, and perhaps for good reason.
Ambassador Jordan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.